The study now will follow a timeline of approximately 100 years to understand the art education policies of our country in the pre and post colonial era. And the art practice of all layers of the society will be included to understand the growth and evolution that took place. And when we look at the contemporary continuum of the folk art practice, it's very important to connect them from its past and also the near past, just to understand that what is the relevance of them, how can the practice survive with its glory, and what are the things that to be taken out, what are the things that are most crucial for this practice, and how to fit the practice or this thing into the historical context, because whether we want it or not, the culture will sustain and survive, because everything has a lifetime, and if that lifetime is not if it's not over as yet, it will be going on, but we need to fit that into the right historical context. So with that, we need to also focus on the academic art during the colonial era first. The modernization in the Indian social context came about with the British rule. The British governance in colonial India took up policies of improvisation for business, communication, and rules and regulation that was focusing mainly for their own benefit. And art education was not an exception. So, the not too far fetched trust that was ruling the authority gained, nevertheless, the restructured in the education system. They wanted the existing education system to be altered, remodeled, and there are benefits, advantages, and disadvantages of that. So we are going to understand those phenomenon into the context of our discussion now. So that is something that established uniformly in law, and also reformed the existing religious postulates. That is very important, that there had been different education centers that was built up. The Muslim students used to go to madrasas, where the Hindus were going to the tolls and chatushpatis of that time. Then came the Christians. They started with their own schools under the church, and they also taught their religious texts to some extent. So in all their schools, the religion was highly regarded throughout. If not, that was the only education that they gave them. The efforts made were intended towards the materialistic culture that has favored the British ruling system, making it smooth and advantageous for them. In such a situation, the offshoots of nationalistic ideals inevitably entered the cultural weave. National thoughts, the nationalistic ideologies just got waved in to the whole thing, because it was very suitable for that time. The post-independence cultural scenario of India faced an ideological conflict that, according to K.G. Subramaniam, led into to his word, it led into a sort of cultural schizophrenia that he mentioned. So it's almost like a multiple identity syndrome, that a same person behaving in many different ways in the many different point of time. So it created some kind of a confusion and abnormality, some kind of a disorder that is indicative of that. The apparent complexity in the cultural milieu was not caused only by the cross cultural concoctions. The change had been largely caused by the gradual collapse of the craft league system that flourished on the state based patronage during the Mughal rule before the British invaded India. That was mentioned by Shobhan Som in 1998 publication, and like he wrote it much before that. So it's very important to understand this in this context, that there had been craft clusters that was developing in Bengal, outside Bengal. We are focusing in Bengal, using it as an example to understand. It's more like the index to get the overview of the whole country's visual culture, but things were happening in a similar direction. For example, Mughal court patronized quite a few distinctive crafts like the brass craft, the glasswares, the glass blowing units were there, the carpet industries, and many such things, which was textile. And so the craft league was flourishing during the Mughal rule by the Mughal patronage, because they grew to cater to the need of the Mughal court. But after the decline of the Sultanate and also the Mughal rule, it was, the craft clusters were there, and there had been craftsmen who got trained through generations. So that was their only tradition. The only thing, they were not able to find out the right market. So if we look at the brass cluster in Muradabad, or the glassware in Firozabad near Delhi and Uttar Pradesh, this area, or the carpet making in Kashmir, Bhadoi and other places, we know that it was only because the patronage was not there. They faced in a confused state at that time, that whom to work for, what is going to be our next market. And there are also new demands, the new time, and also it's the industrial revolution that gave us the phase of mass production. And we also discussed about the printing technology, the printed texts, and it did a lot of change into the modern visual culture of that time, and it was a sudden change in that way. It was not very easy for the craft cluster to take that very smoothly. So it just came as a shock, but it took them some time to realize that things are changing. They could only sense that their works are not getting appreciated and sold. It's not finding the right market that it enjoyed for a very long time. So we will talk about one character, a very eminent name that I took in a different context, that is E.B. Havell. He was appointed as the superintendent in 1838 when Madras School of Industrial Art was declared a government organization. The British superintendents who had been appointed as principals of the art schools of British ruled India before him were not recognized artists of their native lands, because the Britishers hardly cared. They felt that they needed skilled craftsmen who are trained in the British academic style. They needed some people to be trained for their official work. So they needed a proper draftsmanship, and they started training Indian students for that. They generated manpower basically. And these were the institutes, the art institutes that they set up keeping that in mind. But after E.B. Havell came in, he was he fell in love with India. He got involved into the nationalistic uh, movement, and that was very interesting. That when he was appointed, it all changed, fortunately. So, 23 years old E.B. Havel was a fresh graduate at that time. He was trained in draftsmanship from South Kensington School of Design in London. E.B. Havel, 1861 to 1934. He worked in this duration. He prioritized on the development of Indian local traditional craft. He began that way. Havel is considered a visionary to follow people like William Morris, 1834 to 96, and his contemporary John Ruskin, 1819 to 1900, and Roger Fry, 1866 to 1834, and their ideology for the revival of traditional craft in reaction to the principle of industrial revolution of Europe thrived to revitalize the traditional handicraft. We discussed in the beginning that all this art and craft movement and its ideologies that was there in Europe happened in a very different context. They were emphasizing on the handmade craft to build up the value. Here it took a different term, and through the hand of E.B. Havel, as he had the power, he was the superintendent in the art college set up by the Britishers. He could generate the thought and work for it to some extent. E.B. Havel later studied Indian art, religion and philosophy deeply and established himself as one of the precursors of nationalistic movement in India. He has profoundly influenced the art scenes of great masters like Rabindranath Tagore and Abanindranath Tagore in that time. Havel experimented with his notions of art education for the Indian students that is indigenous in nature and do not merely follow the Western trends. Though his proposals were rejected by the ruling authority of that time, he should be considered the foremost visionary, even before Mahatma Gandhi, to have thought of stimulating Indian handloom industry. Later, he placed his support from faraway England to Gandhi, praying for his success. In 1896, Havel was transferred to the Government Art School in Kolkata. Havel left Government Art School, Kolkata, with much exasperation and left for England in 1906. Abanindranath Tagore, as a professor of Government Art School, Kolkata, had conflict with Percy Brown and resigned in 1915. Devi Prasad Raichaudhuri, 1899 to 1975, was appointed as the first principal of Indian origin to the Government School of Art, Madras, in colonial India in 1929. A year ahead of it, in December 1928, the Vice Chancellor of Madras University, A.S.B. Ramaswamy Mudela, and legendary social servant Kamaladevi Chattopadhyay had recommended Debi Prasad Raichaudhuri to the post of Vice Principal of the Institute. In 1900, nominated in 1899, Lawrence Bruns, 1863 to 1929, joined Bombay School of Art as principal. He could not support Havel as he desolated the Western notion of teaching for Indian students in Government Art College, Kolkata. Lawrence Burns did not approve Percy Brown's way of separating the departments of Western style and Indian style of Government Art College in Kolkata either. In Lawrence Bruns' opinion, Naturalistic study of Western norms should have been given equal importance in academy with the traditional art. Art schools are meant to teach fundamental skills to its pupils that opens their eye to art in general. Training of traditional skill introduces its practitioners with style that appears and disappears from time to time and are subjective in nature. Without the fundamental training, the students should not be taught any style. During his tenure, the autonomous department named Sir J.J. School of Art and Architecture opened in Bombay. Lawrence Burns was a perfect disciple of Birdwood, who was a referee of the Indian collection of South Kensington Museum and had no faith in the revival of traditional art. For him, they were as dead as Greek classical art. He meticulously prepared catalogues that contained traditional ivory craft, gold and silver filigrees, old maps of Bombay Island, and old photographs that holds importance in the study of Indian craft. During Gladstone Solomon's tenure as a principal of Bombay School of Art, Percy Brown, with some help from Jamini Prakash Gangopadhyay, overruled E.B. Havel's system in Government Art School, Kolkata, separating Indian style and of art education from Western style and emphasized on academic figure drawing, antique study, cast drawings, transparent watercolor painting technique for representational artworks, still life study and analogous conventional Western academic wisdoms. Those who supported Percy Brown were against Rabindranath Tagore's principle of art education. So let's talk about the exponents of the Bengal and Bombay schools after the separation of the opinions. Right? There's one Percy Brown, one Rabindranath Tagore conflict. So this was a time when two different schools of contemporary Indian art became very prominent. One is known as the Bengal school under the vision of E.B. Havel and Rabindranath Tagore, and the other was Bombay school with the vision of Gladstone Solomon, who perpetually criticized Havel, Rabindranath and Rabindranath negatively in his book Essays of Mughal Art in 1932. Before E.B. Havel and Gladstone Solomon, the conflict had never been so apparent between the art practitioners of Kolkata and Bombay School. Bombay School of Art was primarily influenced and motivated by the paintings of Raja Ravi Verma. So we must also see the context of Raja Ravi Verma in this context, who is known to be the father of modern painting in India. Raja Ravi Verma, with origins from Kerala, was a Bombay-based painter. He was immensely popular among all Indians. His photographic realism and perfection of Western oil painting technique to portray Indian mythological characters own the heart of every Indian. So what we see in his works, though there are limited images here, just to give you some impression and not divert you from the topic, Raja Ravi Verma, who rather became the parameter to assess all the artworks of his time, what we see here is he is choosing subject matters from the mythological characters. Often they're just as secular as the lady with the baby. So it's a mother and child, and the title of the artwork is translated as "Here Comes the Father" with the pet dog. So the subject matter ranged from the religious, mythological and daily life topics, but the kind of sensibility that he was trying to portray was very interesting here. In Ravi Verma's art, we see that as an artist, he was trained in a British academic style. So, when he used oil painting as the medium, he painted the artworks with the European style. When we say West, we mostly mean Europe. That is not very right, but that is how we talk about it. So he was trained under the European tutelage, and then he incorporated all those methods and materials in his artworks. But the subject matters are very consciously chosen. He never worked on any Western subject matter. Rather, he made Indian gods and goddesses. He was the first one to give the Indian gods and goddesses a contemporary profile. So they have become more naturalistic than the idealistic forms that was there, that we found out in Patachitra painting that we saw earlier, that every time the emphasis was there on the iconographic features of those deities. They never came with the kind of ideal anatomy that is very, very European in nature. So he incorporated a Renaissance sensibility into the Indian subject matters. Through Ravi Verma, he became so popular that all those images of gods and goddesses that almost became reality to common people. And he had a lot of impact. His works were so popular that he had to finally move to mass production. He produced oleograph in his studio to give his work, because everybody wanted to own Ravi Verma, and his things were shown everywhere. So he definitely, without any doubt, was the person who could really attract the human mind instead of a very difficult time that he had as an artist to struggle and survive. However, we are not getting deeper inside the context of Ravi Verma. He is also highly criticized now in today's context as a calendar painter, because the kind of images that he produced had a commercial bent towards it. But this is very important to know that after the folk art and minor art tradition, Ravi Verma took up the place, and perhaps because of Ravi Verma's sensibility, the folk art tradition of India was just looked and perceived as something more amateurish and naive comparatively. So he created some kind of a difference to the whole scene. So we find in Swami Vivekananda's comment on Indian art and culture a different comment on Ravi Verma. He spontaneously states that mimicking the European art may give birth to one or two Ravi Vermas in his writing. Native putter paintings with Chalachitra are rather better. At least they are brightly colored. Ravi Verma puts him in grave shame. Gold paintings of Jaipur and backdrop paintings of Durga are superior to that. Their limited ways try to expound the quality and virtue of traditional institutions to cynical modernists, whether of the new intellectual class in India or of the British administrations. The attitudes of modern Indian artists to their art traditions were to some extent colored by their expositions. Both Havel's and Kumaraswamy's readings of the Indian art tradition had a considerable influence on Indian artists. Some they inspired to look for a distinctively national or oriental style. Some they scared away into taking cover under personalized statements. Written by K.G. Subramaniam again. By and large, they motivated the educated Indian to take a serious interest in his cultural facts, his art styles, his folklore, his crafts, his religion and ritual and their symbolic vocabulary. The traditional artists of India were largely untouched by their expositions, except probably in gaining a sense of pride and status and a desire to keep some of their languishing skills alive. Although both of them, especially Anand Kumar Swami, had studied the structure of traditional art practice with remarkable thoroughness, their effort to build up a unified generic image of the tradition with a homogeneous logic of growth led them more and more into their conceptual archetype and language of symbols and less into their skill and formal characteristics and environmental roots. In 1915-16, Rabindranath Tagore expressed great concern about the slow disappearance of these art forms, the basic rural and folk art forms, which are very indigenous in their character from the cultural scene, and he also stressed upon the need of their collection, conservation and study. He was particularly interested in them as art forms for their art language, the ethos, the values, and also the folk idiom that was important for Tagore, not for their historical and anthropological value so much. Tagore, as a modernist, looked at it from a very different perspective, which is, I think, most important in today's context also. He felt that an exposure to various categories of folk literature could clear the horizon of our writers, and that an exposure to folk art forms could enrich the sensibilities of our artists. Almost about the same time, Abanindranath Tagore motivated his favorite student Nandalal Bose to study the works of the Patuas of Bengal and emulate their work methods. He also wrote his now very well known monograph on the ritualistic floor graphics of the region Banglar Broto. In 1923, when he went to Shantiniketan and addressed the art students of the newly formed Kala Bhavan, the nationalistic principle that they had in Kala Bhavan, he laid special stress on the need to sustain the reactive folk and village art to the students that time. Nandalal was already involved with this as an artist who wanted to place the foundation of a new art movement with indigenous mournings. He tried to analyze the linguistic structures of many of the country's traditional art forms, their techniques, their formal breakups, the visual basis, and the functional specialities of them. For all his limitations, he was the first person in the country to make a serious and methodological effort in this particular direction. Many other artists of his time and later responded with enthusiasm and empathy to these art forms, but their responses were often limited by the lack of analytic grasp that was there in Nandalal Bose. So, this is very fortunate for us that Nandalal Bose has showed us a path, and we can still get to see his works, and through his work he spoke about it. He also wrote it very clearly, and the works are all preserved now. So, from this point, it's very important for us to also look into another very important part, that is the contemporary phase of folk art, how we interpret them, how we judge them. As you know, even now, the academic practice and the practice of folk art is going parallelly. Though after the art educators are emphasizing on building up style, the individual styles, it's taking a different route. But moreover, we need to just concentrate on the recent practice that we have seen in our previous lectures and understand the basic ethos with that.